You ever notice how peace and discomfort can strangely come from the same place? That sometimes what unsettles you the most might actually be leading you exactly where you're meant to go. It's a curious thing, this feeling of pressure, this unshakable tension that sits in the chest like a quiet storm. You try to ignore it, distract yourself, fill your schedule, even drown it out with noise. But still, there it is, the pull, the ache, the stirring that doesn't go away. What if I told you that this pressure, this inner unrest, isn't chaos at all? It's actually order. It's design. It's God whispering through discomfort. In words you hear with your ears, but in feelings that seem to arise from nowhere. Feelings that linger, insist, push gently but persistently, saying, look, pay attention. There's something here. You see, when something or someone is divinely tied to your purpose, you won't be allowed to remain indifferent. Your spirit will begin to tremble in their direction. Maybe not all at once, and maybe not in ways you can explain, but something shifts, subtly at first, and then with pressure, and then with intensity. You feel them in moments of stillness. You think of them when you aren't trying to. And it's not obsession, it's resonance. Your soul is recognizing something real. But the mind, oh how it resists. It wants reasons, logic, safety. It tells you, no, this isn't practical. This doesn't make sense. But the pressure isn't coming from your head. It's coming from somewhere deeper. A sacred space where the mind doesn't get to have the final say. And God, being the playful force that he is, loves to stir the pot. He taps at the heart, not to torment, but to awaken. To wake you up to what your spirit already knows, but your flesh has forgotten. So you find yourself thinking of this person, not just casually, but with weight, with an ache that feels holy. And you can't tell if you miss them or if you're simply being drawn to them. Maybe you haven't even had the chance to be close to them in the first place, but something in you knows. You know this is not just a crush, not just a fantasy. It feels like destiny, unfinished, unresolved, yet undeniable. That is the pressure. That is divine restlessness. That is what it feels like when God is trying to get your attention through the language of emotion. Now here's the paradox. Peace doesn't always feel peaceful. Sometimes it starts with pressure, with fire, with an itch you can't scratch. Because before a soul can settle in a divine alignment, it has to be disrupted out of its illusions. So if someone is feeling intense pressure in their heart to be with you, it could very well be that God is nudging them toward alignment. Not because they're incomplete without you, but because something about you mirrors their truth, mirrors their purpose, mirrors the part of them that they've been denying or hiding from or waiting to grow into. And so the pressure builds, not to punish, but to prepare. Not to burden, but to bring awareness. And no matter how much they try to run from it, it runs faster because God's whispers are never truly silent. They echo until they're answered. You see, when your spirit is being drawn to another, not out of desperation, but out of destiny, the pressure is not your enemy. It's the evidence. It's the signpost. It's the invitation. You don't need to force anything, but you do need to listen. Because the moment you stop fighting the pull, the moment you stop trying to rationalize the irrational, you just might find that what you thought was pressure was really the sound of your soul remembering its way home. There's a kind of silence that's louder than any words. You can see it in someone's eyes, in the way they pause mid-sentence, in the subtle shift of their breath when you enter a room. It's the quiet weight of what hasn't been said, but desperately wants to be. When someone feels something deeply, but keeps it hidden, it doesn't disappear. It grows. It brews beneath the surface like a storm behind glass. And over time, that suppression turned to pressure, one they carry in their chest like a secret trying to escape. This is what happens when love, real, raw, spiritual love, is buried beneath fear, fear of rejection, fear of vulnerability, fear of messing up something that feels too sacred to touch carelessly. But here's the thing. When God plants a connection in someone's heart, it's not easily forgotten. It doesn't fade with time. It doesn't get smaller just because it's never spoken aloud. In fact, it grows stronger, louder, heavier, and it begins to press against everything they try to use to block it out. So you have this person going about their life, showing up to work, laughing with friends, keeping busy, but all the while their heart is echoing your name. Not out loud, of course, but in the private places where truth lives, and that echo becomes almost unbearable. Because the more they try to suppress it, the more present it becomes. They see you in passing faces, hear your voice in quiet moments, feel your presence in dreams they can't explain. explain. And it's not obsession, it's spiritual friction. The heart is trying to deliver a message the mouth is too afraid to speak. Now let's talk about what that does to a person. It creates a split within them. Ooh, one part wants to let go. Move on, keep things simple. The other part aches. And that ache is divine. It's not weakness, it's awareness. It's the soul recognizing a connection their mind doesn't yet know how to handle. But you can only carry that kind of weight for so long before it starts breaking through the cracks. Because love, true love, the kind that's rooted in spirit and not just chemistry, doesn't like to be hidden. It's like a flower pressing up through concrete. It will find a way. It will create pressure in the chest, tightness in the throat, a restlessness in the spirit. It may look like anxiety on the surface, but underneath it's something holy. It's a longing that has nothing to do with possession and everything to do with purpose. This person is not just feeling emotions. They're carrying a call, and God in His wisdom will often allow that pressure to grow. Not to torment, but to transform. To soften hearts, to humble egos, to dissolve fear. Because until a person admits what they feel, they can't fully be who they are. And so the pressure becomes a teacher, a sacred mirror. Every day it asks, how long will you run from what you already know is real? You see, this is not just about love in the romantic sense. This is about divine alignment, about two souls who recognize something ancient in each other, something beyond logic. That kind of connection doesn't come by accident. And when one soul is awake to it but stays silent, the tension builds. The weight becomes unbearable. And sooner or later, that pressure demands to be released. Through action, through words, through surrender. Because the truth is, no one can hold back divine love forever. You can suppress it, delay it, avoid it, but you can't escape it. It will find you in the quiet. It will pull on your heart when you least expect it. And in time, the pressure will no longer be something they can carry alone. What begins as a burden will end as a breakthrough if they let it. There's something fascinating about how truth makes itself known. Not always with clarity, not always with certainty, but often with intensity. And when it comes to matters of the heart, especially ones that feel divinely orchestrated, that intensity becomes nearly impossible to ignore. It shows up not as a passing thought, but as a pulse, a current that moves through your body and spirit, demanding to be felt. That's how God often communicates, not through thunder and lightning, but through the still, persistent weight of feeling that refuses to leave. Think about it. How many times have you felt drawn to someone in a way you couldn't explain? It wasn't logic, wasn't timing, wasn't even convenience. In fact, everything about it might have seemed inconvenient. Yet there it was, that emotional intensity. That knowing in your chest that this connection isn't random. This person means something. You might not know why, and you certainly don't have all the answers, but you know it's real. That is not a feeling you manufacture. That is something deeper speaking through you. And we're conditioned to doubt it. We're taught to rely on facts, on history, on what makes sense. But when God is aligning two people, He rarely asks for their permission. He bypasses the mind and speaks straight to the heart. You can't reason your way out of it. You feel it when you wake up. You feel it when you're alone. You feel it when you pray. And no matter how much you try to suppress it, there it is, this burning awareness that something is trying to come together, even if you don't understand how or when. Now, people often mistake this intensity for emotional instability, but that's a misunderstanding of spiritual communication. God doesn't always speak in calm tones. Sometimes He uses longing. He uses restlessness. He uses tears that come out of nowhere and dreams that shake you awake. These are not coincidences. They're confirmations. That person you can't stop thinking about, that ache that won't go away, that's not just your heart talking. It's your spirit responding to alignment. When two souls are meant to cross paths in a meaningful way, the universe begins to conspire. And part of that process involves stirring your emotions until you pay attention. Because what you feel deeply, you begin to explore. What you feel intensely, you begin to honor. And slowly, that intensity becomes a compass, pointing you toward what matters most. Of course, this kind of spiritual intensity can be uncomfortable. It forces you to confront things you'd rather leave untouched. You start to question your past, your fears, your timing, your worthiness. That's the point. Divine connections don't just soothe you, they grow you. And the emotional intensity you feel is not there to overwhelm you, but to awaken you. It's the signal that something extraordinary is at play, even if you don't have all the answers yet. You might try to distract yourself, drown out the feeling, or rationalize it away, but none of that works. Because emotional intensity tied to divine purpose has a kind of persistence that logic can't silence. It waits, it returns, and eventually it softens you, not in weakness, but in openness. It makes you available to love, to possibility, to faith. And it prepares you for a kind of connection that doesn't just satisfy the flesh, it fulfills the soul. So when you feel that pull, when someone lingers in your heart with more weight than reason can explain, pay attention. That's not just emotion, that's alignment. That's God reaching into the fabric of your being and saying, this matters. And when something matters that deeply, you don't need to chase it or fear it. You only need to recognize it. Because recognition is the beginning of surrender, and surrender is where love begins. And when love begins, not the kind that flatters, but the kind that transforms, it leaves no room for pretending. It calls you to show up fully. And now, my friend, is the invitation waiting just behind the intensity you feel. We have this strange habit of thinking that resistance means something isn't right. That if it's hard, if there's tension, if the feelings are complicated, then it must be a sign to let go, to walk away, to close the door before it opens too far. But sometimes resistance doesn't mean a stop. It means to pay attention. Because often the very thing we're pulling away from is the very thing our soul has been asking for. And it's not that connection is wrong, it's that it's real. And real things, sacred things, come with pressure. When someone is feeling intense pressure to be with you, they might not show it on the outside. They might seem distant, cold even. They might bury themselves in distractions, pretend not to care, or convince themselves it's just a passing thought. But behind the performance, behind the calm exterior, there's a war going on inside. Because God is whispering gently but persistently, go, move, don't ignore this. And every time they try to ignore it, the whisper grows louder. You see, resistance doesn't cancel the call. It actually confirms it. Because no one resists what they don't feel. You don't wrestle with something unless it has weight. And in this case, the weight is love, connection, meaning it's not just about attraction. It's about alignment. And alignment isn't always comfortable. It brings up everything that's unhealed. All the fears, the doubts, the stories we tell ourselves about not being enough, or being too much, or not being ready. And so, in their attempt to protect themselves, they resist. But God doesn't relent, and why would He? If this connection is part of a bigger picture, if it's meant to sharpen them, stretch them, soften them, then resistance is just part of the process. Think about it. Growth always comes with resistance. Muscles tear to get stronger, soul must break for roots to deepen. And the human heart, as guarded as it may be, has to crack a little to let love in. That pressure isn't punishment. It's preparation. They might try to silence it. Convince themselves they've moved on. Say things like, it's too late, or it's too complicated. But the truth has a way of lingering. It sits just beneath the surface, showing up in unexpected ways. A song, a memory, a moment of stillness, and there it is again. That stirring, that longing, that unshakable knowing. And so the pressure builds. Because until they surrender to what's real, they won't feel peace, only noise. And maybe that's what this pressure is all about. The friction between the truth they feel and the story they're trying to live. But God doesn't deal in fairy tales. He deals in reality, in deep soul truths. In deep soul truth. And when He sets something in motion, especially a connection that carries divine significance, He won't let it fade quietly. He'll keep pressing, not to torment, but to transform. Because love, when it's true, doesn't let you stay small. It asks something of you. It invites you to open, to risk, to trust again. And that's why this person feels what they feel. Not because they're weak, but because they're being led. And it's terrifying to feel that kind of pull when you're not sure where it leads. But that's the nature of spiritual connection. It doesn't come with a map. It comes with a magnet. And no matter how far they run, it keeps drawing them back. So if they're resisting, don't mistake that for indifference. The deeper the resistance, the louder the calling. And in time, that pressure will become too much to bear, not because it breaks them, but because it breaks the illusion they've been clinging to. And once that illusion is gone, all that's left is the truth, clear, simple, and undeniable. Pressure has a purpose. It's not random, and it's certainly not cruel. In fact, when it comes to deep, soul-level connections, pressure is one of the most accurate indicators that something sacred is unfolding. not just emotionally, but spiritually. You see, before anything meaningful can take form, before love can be fully lived, something within us has to be shaped, stripped, refined. And that shaping often comes in the form of discomfort, tension, and yes, pressure. What most people don't realize is that the pressure they feel to be with someone isn't simply about desire. It's about preparation. God doesn't just plant a longing in the heart without also using that very longing to refine the soul. He lets it press in, not to crush you, but to soften you. To take the ego, rigid and full of conditions, and bend it just enough so that love can flow through. And that's where the preparation begins. The person who's feeling this pressure may not even understand what's happening. They just know they can't shake you. They try to forget, they try to move on. They may even attempt to convince themselves it was never real to begin with. But underneath all of that resistance is a transformation unfolding. The pressure doesn't let up because it's doing something important. It's pushing out fear, insecurity, pride, all the things that would ruin something divine if left unchecked. Sometimes, this person needs to be alone in that process. Not because they don't care. Quite the opposite. Because they care more than they can admit. And that care carries weight. So God gives them space, and within that space, the pressure grows. It builds until it starts cracking through their assumptions, until it breaks apart the stories they've clung to. I'm not ready. I don't deserve this. It's too complicated. All those narratives begin to lose their power when the truth keeps showing up in the quiet. And the truth is, they are being made ready. Not overnight, but in layers. Slowly, quietly. The pressure forces them to examine parts of themselves they'd rather ignore. It brings them face to face with their own fear of intimacy, their fear of failure, even their fear of being fully seen. And that's uncomfortable, sure, but it's also necessary. Because divine connection doesn't function on surface level love. It requires depth. And depth only comes when we've been emptied of the things that keep us shallow. This pressure is a refining fire. It's where God does his deepest work. Not in the loud, dramatic moments, but in the silent ones. The ones where nothing seems to be happening on the outside, but everything is shifting on the inside. And one day, often without warning, that pressure becomes a pivot. It turns. What once felt like a burden becomes clarity. What once felt like fear becomes peace, and suddenly they're no longer resisting, they're responding. It's a beautiful paradox, really. The same pressure that once felt unbearable becomes the very force that leads them home, to themselves, to God, and to you. And by the time they reach that moment, they're not who they used to be. They've been prepared. They've been stretched and humbled and ready, not just to receive love, but to give it in a way that honors its source. So if you find yourself feeling pressure, or if you sense that someone is under it because of their connection to you, don't despise it. That tension, that ache, that inner stirring, it's all part of the process. A divine pressure cooker, if you like. And in time, the heat brings forth something pure, something whole, something worth waiting for. Because what God prepares through pressure, he always reveals in peace. There's a moment, quiet, subtle but unmistakable, when all the pressure that's been building inside someone finally turns. It's not dramatic, it's not loud, but it's real. You can feel it in the air around them, in the way they start to speak and how their presence shifts. It's like watching a tide that's been pulling away suddenly change direction. The pressure that once kept them paralyzed, unsure, fearful, suddenly becomes the very fuel that propels them forward. Because here's the truth. Pressure isn't meant to last forever. It's a signal, a preparation, a sacred tension designed to move something from dormant to alive. And when the time is right, something in them yields. Not because they were forced to, but because they finally see clearly. What once felt confusing begins to make sense. The fog lifts. They stop resisting. And instead, they begin to respond. That response doesn't always come with grand gestures. It might just be a message, a look, a small but deliberate step toward what they once ran from. But that step carries all the weight of the journey behind it. Every sleepless night, every wrestled thought, every whispered prayer, it all converges into that one decision, to no longer ignore what's real. And once that shift happens, it's beautiful to witness. The pressure transforms into pursuit. But this pursuit is different. It's not rushed. It's not needy. It's calm, focused, and sincere. Because it's coming from a place of alignment, not confusion. They're no longer chasing a feeling. They're moving in the direction of purpose. They've been refined, humbled, and awakened. And now with clarity they come, not because they need you to fix them, but because they've done the work to stand beside you whole. This is what divine timing looks like. Not just two people meeting, but two people meeting at the right moment as the best versions of who they've become. Everything that once felt delayed, all the time that seemed wasted, starts to make sense. You begin to realize it wasn't a detour, it was preparation. They had to go through the pressure, the distance, the silence, the breaking to finally be ready to love in a way that honors the depth of the connection. And that's the thing, when love finally flows after pressure, it doesn't come with fear. It comes with peace. It doesn't beg for attention. It offers presence. It doesn't ask you to prove your worth. It sees it, and it walks toward you, not because it's convenient, but because it's true. This person, the one who once felt overwhelmed, who once fought their own heart, now stands in a space where love isn't a question. It's a decision. It's a decision. A decision to lean in, to stay open, to be real. And it's not perfect, but it's honest. It's no longer weighed down by the past or paralyzed by uncertainty. It moves with intention. You see, love has always been less about falling and more about returning. Returning to what you always knew. Returning to what your soul recognized before your mind could make sense of it. The pressure was never there to punish. It was there to reveal. And now that it's done its work, what remains is something grounded, steady, and free. So when the time is right, love stops knocking and starts entering. And it doesn't come in like a storm, it walks in like it belongs.